and welcome to Avanzar Social Justice Podcast, Chat for Change. My name is Sabrina Nicholson. I am going to introduce my co-host today. Well, she will introduce herself.
Thanks, Sabrina. My name is Nikki Vilardo. I've been with Avanzar for 14 years now. And Avanzar is a multi-programmatic social service agency and social justice agency serving the community for over 45 years.
So today is really exciting. We have two guests here, and we are all Avanzar staff. My guests will introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Claudia Ratzlaff, the CEO.
Hi, I'm Deborah Hamani, the Director of Social Justice Programming.
So today we are going to talk about Avanzar's change team. We're going to tap into the history of it and what the actual change team does within our agency. But first we're going to start with an activity. So all of us have picked a saying or a word that has roots that you may not know, because I know I was looking it up and it was very interesting to me. I did not know some of the roots that some of these words had. Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll start. Some everyday sayings that roll off our tongues so naturally, as Sabrina said, can have some surprising roots. And mine is master bedroom and master bathroom. And there's no real proof that this saying that is so common among especially the real estate and home buying world is connected to plantation ownership. But when you really think about it, the master bedroom, it evokes that. It evokes that. And I'm happy to say that recently, if you watch HGTV, for example, House Hunters and some of those other shows, Property Brothers, they no longer use that term, and I'm really happy to see that. Instead, it's been replaced with primary bedroom or main bedroom, main bathroom. So that's one.
That's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to have to watch HGTV now so I can figure out.
I just gave them a plug.
I guess I can go next. The one I chose was the Peanut Gallery. And when I did the research on it, it showed that it talked about a section of a theater where you had those that may not have been, I guess, socially, economically advantaged. And the peanuts came in because they would, eat the peanuts and throw the peanuts on the floor. But we know that phrase to really be sort of like like an insult, honestly. That's how we use it. Okay, somebody speaking from the peanut gallery, or let's hear from the peanut gallery. So that was interesting to know that it actually had some history to it.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I chose hooligan, which is a little bit dated in and of itself, but during its time, it was really meant a negative. Like, I usually come to mind like a young person getting into trouble, doing something maybe that's not legal, or a roughhouser, whatever. So I looked it up, and it was actually came from a cartoon series, The Hooligans, which the name was kind of fashioned after hula hands, and it was directed from the newly immigrated Irish into England. And that it really poked fun out of the difference, certainly of economic and maybe their customs. And it really showed a not so positive side of the hooligans.
It's interesting.
So we get into my word, and my word was basket case. And like I said, I was very, very shocked to see what some of these words were. But the word basket case has a historical origin from World War I. And its meaning was the soldiers who actually got their limbs blown off, they had to put them in a basket. And they carried them away from the field in an actual basket. And then along the lines, when people started using it for to talk about people that were dependent on others. And then now it's kind of just, we use it loosely, mental health wise. I'm a basket case, that type of thing. But yeah, never would have known. So thank you for that, ladies. Thank you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to that change team topic, and we are going to talk about the history of the change team. That's the first thing we want to talk about. How did the change team come about? Explain a little bit about what is the change team in this question too.
Okay. Well, the history of the change team, where it was kind of birthed, is close to 15 years ago. The Women of Color Task Force of the National Network to End Domestic Violence wrote an open letter to the membership about the reports of domestic violence staff workers' complaints of being discriminated against, treated in racist ways, and overall just mistreated because of their color. And so the New Jersey Coalition, in kind of like answer to this revelation, which obviously was a pretty obvious one if you looked hard enough, was to develop a training for the New Jersey membership. And it was a 2-day training, and we were able to bring 4 participants, and we looked around and we tried to, take people that were, really ready to do the work and see what this workshop was going to be about. And it was just absolutely a life-changing experience as far as the training really unraveled a true history of from slavery to post-slavery. And it really just showed all the obstacles that were set in place for communities of color not to achieve. Even though it wasn't slavery, it was systematic. And there were so many things that, for me, that I had never learned in school and I was never aware of. And, it just felt like a giant lie, a giant ruse that I was somehow involved in, but not aware of. And so the 4 of us at the time, we shared our experiences, and we had similar impact, and we just knew that this was not going to be a one and done training for our organization, that we were really going to dig down deep. And part of their model was to do caucus work, to have a women of or a employee of color caucus and a white body caucus, so that each could do their work and take their own responsibilities and do it in a way that was safe, and then come together and share lessons. And the change team was the original 4, and then we added some as we grew to keep the initiative going, just to really be the holders of the initiative, because the most important thing was that it live on, that it not be allowed to die. And that's really what the change team is.
Oh wow! So it's really been going. And how long ago was that?
It's close to 15 years
15
now.
years, and we still have a change team that's actively going. Okay. So why do you believe it's really important to maintain the change team, and how does it stay purposeful in the agency?
I think one of the main reasons that it's important to maintain the change team is what Claudia made reference to as far as those systems, because if we know the history of this country, this country was built on systems, and the systems were built to disenfranchise, a large segment of this society. And so those systems can be found in policies and procedures and practices. So the importance of the change team is to make sure that Avanzar isn't supporting those systems. And so we look at our policies, our procedures, and our practices to make sure that they're not discriminatory, that they're not exclusive, that they're diverse, that they're equitable. And so because that's an ongoing process, like Claudia may mention too, that this is a lifetime of learning. It's not a one and done. And so to make sure that we maintain a fair and equitable and inclusive and diverse system within this agency, then the change team will always be important.
Okay, yeah. So like a system of check and
Balances,
okay,
yes.
to make sure we're being equitable and inclusive. Okay. How do you measure the impact of the change team across the whole agency and how it's affecting the agency's dismantling racism initiative?
Well, how do we measure it? We measure it in a lot of ways, in feedback from our staff, in feedback from the community we serve, if we're accepted and if we're engaged by them, and if we have meaningful services to who they are and what they need, because communities of color don't benefit from, say, police intervention for domestic violence the way the white culture does. It's not a trusting, historically trusting interaction. So, and to know that most domestic violence victims just want the abuse to stop, right? That's really what they want. And they don't want their family ripped apart. They certainly don't want the head of their household being further abused by a system or being hauled off to jail. And even so recently as being shot in the street because of domestic violence. And they want the violence to stop. So, that's really so important to move the initiative forward. And it impacts if we can make those connections to why services need to be different,
Right.
why professionals need to be culturally competent. And culturally competent, right now the movement has so many words, and whose words are the best and the brightest and the most forward moving. But it's really about learning from the population you serve what they need and delivering it and
Right.
and really
Right.
coming it together.
Right.
I mean, I know as social workers we are grounded in that, but it has seemed to really lose as we become licensed and therapists and move on. It's a tenet that is really not as held as it was when we were in school. And I mean, I don't know. I don't want to speak to learning institutions now. I still have, I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone. But as far as really it being reflected back in practice, it does not seem like individuals that are being served by the majority of social services are really valued for who they show up to be.
Right. And I think what Claudia brings up is a really good point, is that there is a disconnect between what we say we're doing and what we actually do. Somewhere along the lines between us saying it and doing it, a lot gets lost. We lose a lot in that process. And like Claudia said, we have to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we are delivering what we said, we would deliver. And it's really about finding out what the community that you're serving needs, and then delivering that in a respectful way, in an honorable way, and not seeing them as a deficit, or seeing their culture as a deficit, but recognizing that the culture is actually an asset, if we incorporate it,
That's important, because you can't go into a community and have a deficit mindset.
Right,
'Cause
right.
First of all,
right.
the community is going to recognize it.
Right.
No matter how nice you come in there and be, they're going
Right.
to realize that you're trying to fix them in plain sight.
Right.
You have to come in kind of knowing. You got to identify the strengths first.
Right.
I was telling somebody this the other day. The first thing you need to do is identify the strengths. If you don't see any strengths within that community, you need to stay out of it.
Right.
Because you
Right.
can't really help
Right.
it.
Right.
Yeah, so my next question. Oh my goodness.
Excellent point.
So, okay. So, the change team. Would you say that the check and balance with that service delivery is that the change team will make sure what you're saying you're really doing? Is that kind of?
Sure. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, but it's no one person or one entity. I mean,
Right.
we're not
Right.
putting, staff in a position where, they're not safe to
Yes.
speak against the status quo. We're in it together. We're very understanding that our agency itself, who was founded on really the feminist movement, and we know historically the white feminist movement left out women of color. So we understand we have our own work to do. And that's really the change team is focused on us unpacking our
Right.
own
Right.
our
Right.
own systemic racism. It's
Right.
it's in everything. It's in our
Right.
forms. It's in
Right.
our walls.
Right. Right.
It's in our it's in our history. It is, and so we have to unpack it and then make good policies that aren't performative,
Right.
that are grounded in a strong organizational culture, and that doesn't happen overnight
Right.
if it's in earnest.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would you say the biggest challenge is that the change team has faced so far, and how was it successfully handled?
Me? I would say the biggest challenge, because having been here through the 15 years,
Right.
is keeping it alive, and being able to learn the lessons, not shy away from understanding what we do to contribute. And that was tough in the beginning, and Nikki will share when we did the caucusing. It was scary. It was scary at times, and what we would do as the caucuses, we would ask a question. And one time we asked a question to each group. What was your first memory of racism, where you knew that racism was a thing? Like, how did it happen? And what we went into, the white caucus, and then the caucus of color, and then people came back. And the people of color had such scary and moving stories of being typically younger than the the staff of color, and very really connected to our community. Somebody mentioned that when a family of color would have to go to the doctor, and they lived in Atlantic City, all the doctors were in Ventnor Margate. They would have to take the bus or drive, and that the actual anxiety level as they got further and further into an area where they felt they weren't welcome, and they knew they'd have to be back home before dark to be safe and things like that. Another staff member that worked for us at the time told absolutely frightening story of being down south and being with her brother in the car and another person and really being chased down to where they thought they were going to die. And I mean, those stories were so impactful and so needed to be
Heard.
not only heard but spoken by
Oh,
the staff
absolutely.
themselves.
Absolutely.
And then for the colleagues, the white colleagues, to really witness
Witness it.
the truth of it was just incredible. And we actually got permission from that original group to actually use their stories and continue their stories in a dramatic play, if you will, that we take to communities. It's called Things I Remember, a conversation on race in the U.S. And we invite people in the trainings or when we do the dramatic presentation to even answer that question. And it just gives such community because white people who live in ignorance to the Black experience really get to witness it and understand racism in a very personal, much more personal way, and for people of color to actually speak their truth has also seemed to be very valuable for the communities we've done the training in.
Absolutely. I remember another story because most of the stories that were shared did actually take place during early childhood or early adulthood. But one that was as recent as maybe 10 years ago, because I think that's the first time we did the monologues, was about 10 years ago or so. One of our coworkers was at a store buying electronics during the Christmas season, kind of last minute purchases. So everyone who's there is anxious to get their purchase done and get out. And she just was constantly overlooked by the staff. And she had money to spend for these electronics for her grandchildren, and she kept getting overlooked, not by people who worked there to see if she needed any help, and people felt very free to just go ahead of her in line because I guess the line was not that organized because it was so crowded. And then somebody that was standing kind of next to her said, "Please go ahead," and she did, and she said she just couldn't wait to get out of there. And so that wasn't 1968, that was 2008. It's just crazy. It's just not okay. And it needs to be heard, needs to be witnessed.
So Nikki, you were at the original training, right?
I was at the original training myself. Claudia, at the time, a former colleague who was in community initiatives, she was our community initiatives coordinator, and our social justice director prior to Deborah. And really, what was born out of that also was our Dismantling Racism Initiative, which the Change Team is part of. But the Dismantling Racism Initiative just basically informs everything that we do. Everything that we do, whether it's new policies, new procedures, or like Claudia said, written material, we look at it. Is it inclusive? Does it speak to the audience it needs to speak to? It's created a culture in our agency that is alive and meaningful, and the Change Team is part of what keeps that running.
So, what I can ask this to, I guess, all of you, kinda. What leadership lessons have you learned from making this commitment to dismantling racism and how the Change Team runs? I know you must learn something.
I guess the buck stops here is always a good lesson. It's always a good lesson, and be constantly ready to learn.
Yep.
Be constantly ready to
Yes.
be to have a mirror held up to you and to take accountability for what I bring in the good and the bad. But that if I can take accountability, then you can develop trust, if you can develop trust, you can develop safety, and then you can have the outpouring of meaningful exchange and then collaboration to develop something different. See, because I even talking about social work in the very beginning, the most sacred of all social work was community organization, and that's the thing where you go in and organize a community, and there's been a lot of mapping about this and everything. If you don't give the community the power over their own determinants, and the power is also resources. You can't hold back the resources, so then, they're not really having a say. They're not having the power. And isn't that really breaking down racism?
Right.
Because if you're supporting a community to stand on their own, you're making sure that they have the means to develop the resources. And that's where we fall short as a nation.
Right.
That is really where we fall short.
Right.
I think in answer to that question, for me, in terms of leadership, it really comes down to self-reflection. Going back to the original training that we went to, there were some hard questions that we had to answer about ourselves, about our organization, and also possibly definitely witnessing racism and being a passive participant only just by not speaking up. And so for me, that leadership question, Sabrina, comes down to self-reflection and self-management that I work on every day. I've made some missteps, some big, some not so big, some out in the open, some not so out in the open. And I think that the self-leadership comes from being able to be honest and authentic about those missteps and continuing to learn.
And then it has to be measurable.
Absolutely.
It has
Absolutely.
to be measurable. And it's
How does it
funny
show up?
because when you bring up the training, we did have to rate ourselves as an organization. And let's say it was a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the best. If you gave yourself more than a 2, you were in denial.
Absolutely.
Because before you were in this training,
Absolutely.
you weren't even awake.
Honest to God. It's
But
the truth.
people didn't want to, well, I think I'm doing okay.
Okay.
So we
Right.
had to get real quick.
We sure
and
did.
say, okay,
Yeah.
we're all not doing anything, and you can only go up from here. So
That's so true.
and Avanzar took that commitment to do it, just to keep doing it, just to keep it alive. Now some years we do more than others, some years we're better than others, but we keep it moving, and we have really been blessed to have Deborah Hamani join us.
Absolutely.
And she has just done so much to advance our culturally specific services, to gain just the rapport with staff, and to expand our exposure and deepen our understanding. And I know Deborah probably won't be comfortable, but she is a born teacher, but in such a gentle way, and such a wonderful way that it's really just taken our program so far.
So for me, that question, leadership lessons that I've learned in regards to dismantling racism, it would still have to focus on me, but it would, and what I mean by that is just like they're talking about putting themselves in front of a mirror. I had to put myself in front of a mirror, but in pretty much the same way as them. How am I upholding this system as an African American who lives in a country where you are conditioned to, adjust yourself to this system, right? So, in what ways am I holding up? And one of the things that I discovered is I make sure that we keep white comfort intact, and so learning how to step out of that and be authentic, but without being intentionally offensive, because I really can't control how people interpret it. I can control how I give it, though. And so that was one of the biggest lessons, is that, listen, true allies won't be offended. Speak your truth. And so for me as a leader, that was one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn. And I'm fortunate that I'm surrounded by some true allies that are really phenomenal, that get it. They get it.
Yes. So we talked about the history of the change team and some of the lessons that you have learned from the journey of implementing the change team to today. What is your vision for the future of the change team, and how will it enhance the agency's commitment to social justice?
Well, certainly the vision is that we keep it alive. We keep it thriving, and we keep it ethical and authentic, and really bringing validation to what is really present in our nation when it comes to racism, white supremacy, and racial superiority ideology. That we have to pull back the curtain, if you will, on the idea that it's in our heads, that it's made up, that it's exaggerated, or even that hundreds of years of trauma that is, and I'll let Deborah speak more to that, it is something that can be brushed off and gotten over. So it's just to keep getting more and more real and embracing more and more people into the truth and the healing. Right.
And just to add to what Claudia's saying, it's I see the change team being very instrumental and supportive in all of us healing from this system, because we've all been affected. And I have to preach that everywhere I go, because it affects us differently, but it affects us all. But the impact of it is just as profound as it is for African Americans or any other culture of color as it is for for white people. And what do I mean by that? Is it kind of robs white people of their humanity. And that's very detrimental. The compassion to feel for another person. So when they heal and we heal, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, And so I'm reminded of if I think it was Dr. Joy DeGruy that spoke of a phrase called cognitive dissonance, and we see that in action all the time. So if we remember when, let's say, Tamir Rice or George Floyd or any of our young African American males that were shot by the police, immediately what they do is try to discredit the character of them, because you have to justify the behavior that was done. And so if I can justify the behavior, then I can rob you of your compassion for that individual. And that's what racism has done for white people. Rob them of their humanity, And so, and we're traumatized, and so are they. And so because the system keeps us from coming together, Like, we can't recognize that we're both hurt from this system, and we both need to be invested in dismantling it, because the system itself cares for no one. It cares for no one, you know. If we look at, let's look at the recent shootings in Buffalo. It doesn't care that this young white boy is about to lose his life to a prison system. You understand what I'm saying? And it didn't care about all of the lives that he took. And so this is what all of us, black and white, need to recognize, that this system is ugly and it doesn't care for either one of us. And so I see the change team as being instrumental, in supporting the agency to, let's bond, let's heal together. Let's heal together. Yeah, I'm a big humanity person. I'll be the first to admit it. I'm always pro, humanity. And so when you invest in my healing and I invest in your healing, and in turn, it's a win-win situation. It's a win-win situation. And so I have to say what so many have said since I've been here, that they've never experienced an agency that actually considered this, let alone put it to action. So it's really a tremendous, profound blessing that I not only do I just have the role, because plenty of agencies have, director of social justices, your DEI director, but it's a lot of, it's performative. It's not actual doing, but this agency is really about doing the work. Is it easy? No. But are they committed? Yes. Yes. Yes.
And our hope is to bring it outside our agency as well, and to have more workplaces, more
Right.
schools, more institutions understand that this work has to be done, and it has to be done building by building, organization by organization, and you have to put the time into it.
Yes,
And
you do.
we're hoping we can really impact a generation, the generations to come.
Yes, we definitely need healing on all
Yes.
sides, racial healing. Claudia, when you were talking, you mentioned the trauma and racial superiority ideology, and that is definitely, I know, what played a big part in Buffalo shooting.
Oh, yes.
So we definitely need to.
Yeah, I haven't read all there is to read on that, and I don't know that all there is to know about that is even out yet.
Right.
Right.
But what we do know is that this individual, whether it was generated in his household, in his neighborhood, or if he was just able to research it and be taken by it, that it's available, it's out there. We were so crazed about the Middle Eastern campaign to take our young people, right? We were worried.
Right.
We were
Right.
making changes.
Right.
That's the kind of energy, maybe not exactly the same way, because I don't know that was healthy too, but that's the energy we have to come around. And the hate that is out there, the organized hate, the philosophical hate that is based on race. And when we can impact that, because I don't know where he got it, but he was able to get on the internet and find
Access it.
like-minded,
Right.
and really and find a direction that was just living the mission of this hate. And this is the result. So we have to stand up against that. We have to.
So we definitely offer our condolences
Yes.
to the families of the victims in the Buffalo shooting, and our thoughts are with you. Thank you for tuning in to our episode of Avanzar's Social Justice Podcast, Chat for Change. Please tune in to our next one.
Chat for change. 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 Chat for change.